Okay, Sally, so who are we talking about today?
Hi, Sally. Well, we're talking about Naomi Judd. Obviously she's been in the news, with sad news and kind of unexpected news for a lot of people that haven't followed her life that closely, right?
Mhm.
So, and she was obviously part of the Judds, the singing group with her daughter Wynonna. And they were just a super successful country singing duo in the basically 1980s, pretty much. And they reunited later on, but they were pretty well known. I remember a couple of their songs.
Love
So
can build a
I
bridge, huh?
I enjoyed them.
Yeah, beautiful singing voices, and they just blended so perfectly together. Um, and so I had vaguely in my mind that Naomi had some health issues. I had thought physical health issues, which she did have until I read about her death. I didn't realize she'd been suffering from mental health issues as well. So we'll be able to look at both of those aspects in her chart when we pull it up. So if you could tell us when she was born.
So let's see. So she was born in 1946, January 11th in Ashland, Kentucky. So I believe that's, in Appalachia. And you had mentioned the other day when we were talking about setting this up that she had a similar birth date to Dolly Parton, who was born in Tennessee just about a week later, I think.
Yeah, was it around the 18th or 9th, or maybe the 17th even that she was born?
Yeah, it might have been I'm not sure. It might have been the 19th, but anyway, very close together, both country singing stars. So I thought that was interesting because they would have had some of the same planets in the same signs, but obviously a different configuration and probably different moon sign and ascendant and so on.
Yeah, definitely both rags to riches stories, though. Born in abject poverty and then rose to great heights of fame and wealth.
So we'll have to look at Dolly.
Yes, we'll put her on the list. Well, if we look at Naomi's chart, the first thing that I notice about her chart is that she has a pretty even distribution of planets above the horizon and below the horizon. More of her planets tend to be on the eastern side of the chart, although she does have the Sun, Venus, and Mercury on the western side. So that tells us this is someone who's pretty self-directed. If you have a majority of planets on the western side of the chart, it means that you tend to be more others directed. So she would be her own counselor. She would make her own decisions a lot of the time. And then also another thing that jumps out at me in the chart is this moon. She was born at night. The sun had already set. You can see it's gone below the descendant here. And so the primary light in the chart is this moon. And I don't know, Sally, what does this moon, this Taurus moon in the 10th house suggest to you?
I would think that emotionally, it would be very important for her to achieve and be out there in a public way. It's not that far from her midheaven, and that would be important to her emotionally, I would think. It's obviously trining the sun. They're both earth signs, and her sun is in Capricorn. It's actually a wide trine, right? But
it's very close to the Mercury because she has the 3 planets in Capricorn. And so that moon particularly hits that kind of midpoint between Mercury and Venus, which we think of Taurus as the throat. And so that she was known for her beautiful singing voice.
Yeah, and her beauty. I think, Wynonna actually was the stronger voice and she was the musician. So it's interesting to look at Naomi's chart and analyzing that a little bit too, because I think there was a little bit of competition between the two of them. But obviously they were also supportive of each other. They needed each other to succeed in the way that they did initially.
Yeah,
For sure. And you mentioned the Mercury trining the moon. I think Naomi in particular had an ability to really relate to the public really well. She did do very well socially. And I think in their act, she seemed to be the one that, would talk to the audience and was sort of, I don't want to say scampering about the stage, but, she moved quite a bit during the stage and drew a lot of attention with her beautiful outfits and her beauty.
Yeah, because of that moon, is exalted in Taurus, which means that it gets everything that it needs. It's the honored guest in her 10th house, and it's ruled by Venus, which sees it by trine. And so it's just an absolutely lovely aspect. And then also you think of the public, how you're seen in the public in the 10th house, and she's seen as the mother. She became famous as the mother in a mother-daughter duo. And she had her daughters were very famous as well. So I like that aspect of it too. But there's something else kind of simmering away in this chart that is not quite so lovely. Where would you pinpoint that, Sally?
Well, if we're going to be moving on from the moon, definitely that Saturn-Mars conjunction in the 12th, I would think would be her most difficult aspect. The two malefics in a very private house. And so it suggests a lot of internal things going on within her and maybe within her ancestry. And it's also in opposition, obviously, to her 6th house planets, particularly the Sun and the Venus right there. And it's squaring the Chiron Jupiter, right, in the 3rd. So those are challenging for her.
So very, very sharp T-square there. And that Sun almost exactly opposite Saturn, which tells us, about difficulties with the father. I don't know, did she grow up knowing her father or?
I read I saw an interview where she was talking about how much she missed her father. I think he died in 1984, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but she seemed to have a good relationship with her father, but she had some difficulty with other male figures, at least one relative that we know about. And there may have been others. As she said, they have a lot of secrets in her family. So we obviously don't know everything, right?
Right. And with that ruler of her 4th house being in her 12th, that definitely would suggest family secrets. And especially with conjunct Saturn, there's just this very repressed energy with that conjunction. And both Saturn is in its detriment in Cancer, and Mars is in the fall. So
right.
They both struggle to express themselves and to bring that, in Cancer, that security that she really craves. She's just not finding it in her early life. And then she's got this Sun over here too, which she's a Leo rising. So the Sun is not just the light in her chart, the luminary, but it's also the ruler of her chart. And when you tuck a planet into the 6th house, it does struggle a bit, don't you think? Yeah, there's that idea that a planet needs to see the ascendant in order to function well in that person's life. And so when the Sun is over here in the 6th house, it's in Capricorn, it's at what's called averse. to the ascendant in Leo. They're that quincunx aspect. And so that means that Sun is over here in the 6th house and it's working hard. It's, definitely concerned with health issues. But this is a person who loves to shine, a Leo ascendant. So I can almost see her being someone who just puts so much energy out there and almost drains herself. From what you've read of her life, would that explain?
Well, definitely with that 6th house, Capricorn, she was a hard worker. She held down several jobs, was early divorcee and raised the children while she was holding down a couple jobs. She went to nursing school, put herself through nursing school while the children were really young, and later completed it. I think there were some interruptions there, but yeah, definitely somebody who I think worked really hard, and we can see that in the chart, right? With that, all that energy in the 6th house.
And then not seeing the ascendant, she would be probably given to overwork, don't you think? And really running herself down.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point.
Yeah, one thing, if we look at the element balance in her chart, she has no planets in fire. She has the midheaven and she has the ascendant in fire, but everything else is air, water, and earth.
Well, she does have Pluto there,
and
right?
Pluto,
But
right.
her personal planets are not.
Right. And so that tells us there's someone who appears to have a lot of energy and drive, but inwardly maybe doesn't quite have those resources. It's almost like somebody whose eyes are a little too big for their stomach. It takes on more than she can actually handle as a physical body.
She's got that ascendant square the moon also. And the ascendant is, yeah, as you say, the physical body. That's part of the health aspects that we can see in the chart. And she obviously, developed hepatitis C when she was in her early 40s. And I did see a video where she was getting knee injections because she said she had a lot of difficulty with her knees.
Oh, that's Capricorn, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And part of it was wearing high heels for 3 hours on stage. That would probably bother anyone's knees.
Right. Yeah. And especially if she worked as a nurse all those years too, that's physically
absolutely. You're on your feet a lot. So yeah, we can see that especially with the Capricorn there.
And I
think
think
associated with that.
I think, didn't she also get hepatitis C from her nursing?
I believe the doctors felt that she got it from a needle, probably obviously accidental when she was working as a nurse and maybe handling something that was contaminated.
And there's that ruler of the 6th house, Saturn, being in her 12th house of secret enemies. And what would be the secret enemy? Mars, a needle.
Wow.
So sometimes astrology is just so literal, it's just startling. And then also you'd pointed out this moon square the ascendant Pluto. And so you can see that shine being pulled into the public and the moon just wanting to give and share with everyone. And then it's in square though to this ascendant, which is conjunct Pluto. So would that tell us that this is another signature in the chart that she could just give more than physically she could handle?
That's a good point. I was also thinking that, she was a more complex individual too, than, how she presented herself versus her internal emotional life, even though the moon is up there very prominent. I think there's a lot more complexity within her that we don't know about.
Well,
And obviously
even,
that's part of the 12th house planet.
yeah, when she passed away, most of us were startled. We thought of her as this beautiful, famous singer, just gifted and just a lovely presence in the world, that she suffered from horrible mental illness and depression. Just absolutely floored me.
She also has Neptune in conjunct the moon as well. So, and I would think somebody with that aspect has a lot of sensitivity, and that would also take a toll on your emotions and your body, right? And she worked as a nurse and was very compassionate from what I've read, and just a really compassionate person. So you're right. I think that could be kind of draining for her.
Yeah. And Pluto on the ascendant, since you yourself have a first house Pluto, how would you describe that?
Well, I think, Pluto is obviously a very strong transformational planet. Again, she's a more complex individual than we may have seen. She sort of came across as a simple country girl who went from rags to riches. But, she obviously had a lot of capability and what I would say complexity to her that maybe wasn't obvious to a lot of people, including her fans. I think Pluto can be also very intuitive, very powerful. But, she was able to kind of modify that just because she did have that prominent, nice moon, and she's got the Venus conjunct sun. She's got some nice qualities there that maybe wouldn't have, would have kind of sublimated the Pluto a bit.
Yeah, and Pluto with the ascendant too, just like I'm in control, I'm not going to lose it.
But again, in Leo, it's more of a, it's also kind of a fun energy and playful energy as well. And she definitely had that. She also talks about how she really liked colors. And I noticed that she had a lot of colorful, beautiful outfits when she was performing.
Yeah, that's the Leo rising too.
Yeah, that's Leo rising too.
Yeah. You like your feathers. Well, so we'll look at some transits now from her life. And what happened around the age of 3.5 in her life?
So I read an article where she was interviewed and said that she was abused by a great uncle, at her grandparents' home or her family home. There was a little bit of discrepancy on that. But, she was a very young child, and, it was very disturbing. And she described it as the beginning of her depression started then, because otherwise she was a pretty happy child, she said.
Yeah, so I just did a chart for when she was exactly 3.5. And so obviously looking at the faster moving planets isn't going to tell us much, but what about the slower moving ones?
So I was just looking at that 12th house again. But Uranus is the slow moving one there. She's got Neptune, slow moving one in the 3rd house.
Yeah, one of the signatures of Uranus is trauma. And so Uranus slipping into your 12th house can bring up some hidden traumas. And so we can see that, this is going to be a long transit that lasts 7 or 8 years. So I would imagine, a childhood abuse like that just plants a certain trauma within you that's never really going to go away.
I think after her last reunion tour with Wynonna, she mentioned that a lot of the abuse memories came up, particularly at that time. That would have been in 2012, I think, 2011. And it's interesting because in one of the Oprah documentary series, I think it was through an Oprah related program, that part of the purpose of that reunion tour at the time was to kind of work out difficulties in the past that she'd had with Wynonna. And instead it brought up a lot of apparently difficult feelings of, in the past. So I'm not sure how immediately healing that tour was for her.
Mm. Yeah, you can see during this time, the South Node was going through her Libra planets, squaring her that Sun, Venus opposite Mars, Saturn. And remember, Mars ruling the family. And so this is at the South Node here is kind of setting off that T square with Jupiter. And so that's something that's draining, something that's being taken away from her.
That safety, in the third house is kind of your immediate environment.
Yeah, that's true. And immediate family too.
Immediate family.
Which could be, the relatives who kind of are not your mother or father, but they're close by.
Mm-hmm.
So something, and Neptune is not too far away from the South Node at that time. She has Neptune in her third house anyway, which could show some spiritual difficulties around family members too. And another thing we'll talk about in a minute is that she lost a brother to leukemia around this time.
And Jupiter, we think of, even though this is a night chart, it still would be a benefic, positive, but it's got that Chiron conjunction. So there is a woundedness to that, and her Jupiter's impacted there. And that T square, I think, falls direct, most closely on the Chiron, actually. But
yeah, so we'll have to notice when we get to the depression chart where the nodes were, because that South Node, when she was 3.5, was crossing that Chiron in the third house. So yeah, you can see some definite seeds were planted at this really young age of trauma in her life.
And like you say, there may have been some religious factors that were difficult, and we'll probably see that too. She had a child initially out of wedlock. I mean, she was married when the baby was born, but it didn't seem like she had a lot of financial support from her family. She struggled quite a bit. So, that's kind of interesting there.
Yeah.
And I think also the Jupiter, she did have quite a few educational aspirations. And later on in her life, I think she made up for that quite a bit. We can talk about that later.
She must have been a very intelligent lady who could go back to school. It's getting a nursing degree is very challenging academically and physically. So that she was able to do that while being a single mother, it just speaks a lot.
I think she was very inspirational.
Yeah, I think she even in her later years was kind of an inspirational speaker, wasn't she? Just because her story could empower so many people. Well, just going back to her chart real quickly, we had in the mid-60s of Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Virgo, which would have been in her second house, and squaring her Uranus. And so during those years, can you kind of outline some things that happened from like 63 to 65?
So you mentioned her brother earlier. He was diagnosed with leukemia probably around 1963. And when we talk about siblings, we usually talk about the third house, right? As well as Mercury aspects,
Mhm.
or Mercury, the planet. And then her senior year in high school, well, she did comment that a lot of the family attention was on the brother. Obviously, that would be very concerning to have a sick child. And I think she probably lacked some attention. And with that Leo rising and the Pluto there, that would have been really important to her to have that attention, and it was taken away from her. And so she got involved with maybe a classmate or a neighbor boy or whatever, got pregnant, and then gave birth to Wynonna when basically, I think the week she graduated from high school. So she was
And we can
18 as a mother.
we can just briefly pull up the chart with Wynonna, because that would kind of tell us what was going on in Naomi's life at that time. So this is the birth chart for Wynonna on the outer wheel. And so you can see this Jupiter Uranus conjunction in her second house. I imagine she all of a sudden had to, she was responsible for caring for a child when she was a teenager.
She very quickly married another person because the father of the baby left town. And so she actually married very quickly before Wynonna was born, a classmate who actually had proposed to her on her first date when she was 15, but she wasn't in love with him. But he really cared about her and was willing to marry her, knowing that she was pregnant with somebody else's baby.
Yeah, I think she was a very beautiful probably girl at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But, you can just see that loving spirit within her. I'm sure people fell in love with her when they met her from the time she was very young. And so it must have been difficult for her to kind of be fielding all of that love being poured out towards her, with that Taurus moon up here. And so you can see when Wynonna was born during this time, Jupiter was crossing that moon.
It's interesting, to look at that now too, because Wynonna, I think, helped Naomi achieve things in her public life that I don't think she could have achieved without her daughter.
She probably wouldn't have even thought of it to go out and perform, do you think?
Well, she bought Wynonna a guitar around the age of 12. That is Naomi or Wynonna's age. And Wynonna obviously is super talented, taught herself how to play the guitar, and she just has this super strong voice. And Naomi always was more the background harmonizer. But she was the one that obviously went around. She was the mom and went around to, get gigs to play and get them a recording contract. She was the one that did that because Wynonna was really young when they started.
Yeah, and you can see just the emphasis that would be in her life for quite a few years of just, keeping the wolf from the door. That Saturn, it's in the 8th, transiting her 8th house when Wynonna is born, opposite this Uranus, Pluto. And then Chiron's not far away. So, she had some really tough years. And even though she married, she did divorce, right? And so was on her own as a single mother. Not too many years later after Wynonna was born.
Mm-hmm. That second house, 8th house axis really does apply, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And notice then
Trying to make it
creates a T-square then when it's opposing with her Uranus. So again, just a lot of challenges, a lot of upsets, probably surprising news, twists and turns of fate throughout those years. And then, and it is interesting that the moon was on her son when Wynonna was born. So
a new chapter.
Those two are bonded for life, you can see. So anyway, let's take her to happier times then. she and Wynonna eventually started, like you say, they started singing together. And let's see, we'll do, I think they kind of struggled along for a while, right? Before they finally kind of were noticed.
Let's see, I'm trying to remember the dates here. I think she ended up, they did live in California, and that's where the younger daughter, Ashley, was born.
Mhm.
And then she was divorced from her first husband in 72. And then they later moved back to Kentucky. And then I think in 1979 was when she moved to Nashville. She was still
Okay.
working part-time as a nurse, but she thought that would give them more exposure. But I gather that they were kind of performing casually, perhaps, but then, they wanted to make it in Nashville, and
Yeah,
that's where you
Wynonna was
go.
still pretty young. She was born in 64, so in 84 she would have been 20. So she was probably even still in high school then when they were first starting to perform together.
Yeah, and I'm sure she was very young.
But for musical artists, the big day is when they get their first #1 hit. And so I did a chart for December 22nd, 1984, when they did get their first hit record. And so these are the aspects on that day to Naomi's chart. I think the one thing that jumped out to me right away was she was having her Uranus opposition, which happens to people around the age of 44, 42 to 44. And so you can see her creativity, her in her 5th house, really lighting up Uranus in the 11th house, and that she found her audience. You can think about the 11th house as being an audience. And so that's just lightning striking there. So what else do you see, Sally, and going on in her chart on that day?
Well, the sun is conjunct Mercury there on that transit.
And Mercury is her money planet because it rules her 2nd house. So she probably saw a few dollar signs when she saw she had that #1 hit.
The transiting North Node is in the 10th, so that's a good sign. She's got Jupiter very close to that sun as well.
Yeah, Jupiter is just 2 degrees away from reaching her sun. So that's pretty exciting.
That transiting Venus also in the 7th house, partnered with her daughter.
And this Uranus opposition that she's having, notice where Venus is, it's trine natal Uranus and sextile there. So that just she wins fame as a partner. And that 28-degree Mars had just passed a sextile to her midheaven. So that's another exciting one. And then the like you say, the transiting North Node in her 10th house.
Her Pluto opposes her moon in the 10th.
Oh, yeah, that is a sweet one, isn't it? Yeah. That really does indicate that moon has being, it's almost like jet fuels being pushed into it. But what about this Saturn and South Node in her 4th house? She's all of a sudden very famous. She's traveling a lot.
That's a good point, because in her home life, to make it work, she had to leave her younger daughter behind, right?
Yeah, because Ashley was born in 68, so in 84 she would have been what, 16?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so still in school. So she couldn't just pick up and travel around the country with her mom and sister.
So that was probably a concern on both Naomi's part, and Ashley, I'm sure, kind of felt left behind. I understand Wynonna too did a lot to raise Ashley, her sister, because Naomi was always working. And so she had to, there's a sacrifice there, right? With the home life.
I think that's a good way of describing that Saturn South node there. And even, Pluto is starting to set off a square to itself as one it's opposing the moon. So you can see that it was kind of bittersweet for her to achieve this fame and recognition. In a way, she's realized a dream, but yet the cost, having to lose her kind of ability to be a mom and be in the home and care for her children. Her private life too, all of a sudden, everyone wants to know who Naomi Judd is. And she's, you think whatever else someone with a Pluto ascendant is, they are very private. So you can see that even though wonderful things are happening in her life at that time, there are some real downsides. So, and how do you think that, can you see anything setting off her T-square, that Saturn-Mars in the aspects?
Her natal T-square?
Her natal T-square. Jupiter. It doesn't look like too much is happening with that. Mars is actually, for once, supporting her Mars. I'm sorry, Saturn is supporting her Mars Saturn conjunction at this time.
With the trine.
Yeah. So you can see very great success, but very great strain being planted in her life at this time. And they were not famous and at the top of their game for very long until they had to make a pretty startling announcement in, let's see, I think it was 1990. So we'll do Naomi Judd and we'll look at. Yeah, it was announced she would so she retired for what reason?
So yeah, so she hadn't been feeling well, and I think she was diagnosed in 1990 with hepatitis C.
And so they think that was something been kind of dormant in her system for a number of years since she'd been a nurse. And
that's a disease of the liver. So and Sagittarius rules the liver, I believe, and with that natal Chiron in conjunct Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, that seems to be a factor there with the Chiron conjunct Jupiter, perhaps.
Yeah,
I was trying to figure out how the hepatitis C how one could see that perhaps in her chart. And so that's how I would maybe look at that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know enough about medical astrology to do that analysis, but you certainly see from her chart with 3 planets in her 6th house, all ruled by Saturn, that how she's someone, even if you were doing a reading for her when she was 15 years old, you'd have to say, take very good care of your health. You're going to have to always be mindful of your body is your instrument, and you have to do everything you can to take good care of it. And I wonder if they had their hit record in 84 and this is 1990. I wonder if maybe it was their life on the road that really triggered the illness, the stress and strain on her body, not being able to get adequate rest or exercise or diet.
Yeah, I would think just any of those musicians that travel on the road, and keeping odd hours and what are they eating, it would be very stressful.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So I almost wonder if that was kind of what triggered hepatitis C to come back. And in the early 1990s, we had this lineup of Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn were all in Capricorn. So wherever you have a Capricorn house in your chart, those years were very important. You probably felt yourself being pulled in a lot of different directions that year in the house that Capricorn ruled. And so going through her sixth house, I assume she was, just working like crazy. But also, health is just taking all sorts of hits from having to work so hard.
And I know it was a great disappointment to her to have to, basically at that time, well, first of all, there really isn't a career, or at least there wasn't at that time. I'm not that familiar with hepatitis C. But there was some question as to whether or not she was going to survive it. So that would have been super scary, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't a quick fix either I think it took her 3 years to be healed. And so that's another signature of not just the house being ruled by Saturn, but Saturn was transiting her house at this time. And what else was Saturn doing? And see,
kind of opposite
she was having a Saturn opposition. Those are usually pretty serious times in our lives when Saturn, of course, the Saturn return, but also the Saturn square and the Saturn opposition. It's when something tells you in life, you are going to have to be very disciplined to deal with this. Here's a hard truth, and you need to figure out how to manage it. Because, the first Saturn opposition we get is usually around 14 or 15, when all of a sudden life just seems to be so unfair, and our parents are unfair, and they're telling us that we have to do all, we're very like, who are you to tell me what to do? We almost go through that period again when we have a Saturn opposition 30 years later. And so she's probably not, her body is telling her, you need to slow down, you need to rest, you need to retire. And, the Saturn in the 12th house is probably, her natal Saturn is probably saying, but I have an audience, I want to give, I want to share, I have responsibilities. So I can see it would have been very heartbreaking for her to have to retire at this point.
That's a good reminder in general for anyone who has planets in the sixth. You do have to pay attention to your health.
Yeah, and when planets are transiting there, just pay a little bit more attention than you do normally. It's good advice to anybody to pay attention to their health, but sometimes we can ignore things, and other times, when we have these transits, we need to pay attention. I think Anne Ortley has an expression when she does her astrology forecast. She says, this aspect is coming up. It means don't ignore the symptoms, go right to the doctor.
Exactly.
So, and Uranus, of course, and Neptune are here too, just strengthening that real strong disappointment she must have been feeling. And plus, you can imagine if you are like a top performer, traveling the world, having this glamorous life one day, and then the next day, you're in bed, a patient. That must have been just a horrible shock to go from one life to another like that.
Yeah, I think it was very devastating, and it was, again, an unknown at that time if she were ever going to recover, and it was life-threatening. I believe also there's that south node, the transiting south node on our ascendant. I wonder how significant that is there too.
Yeah, because that's the kind of the energy draining out. And I would imagine the North Node being on her descendant, she was probably getting advice from people like her family, her husband, her family. They said, we don't want to lose you.
That Mercury Venus transit there on her Chiron Jupiter is kind of interesting there as well.
Yeah, because this is the day the announcement was made. So I'm sure the decision was probably made long before then, or at least a number of days or weeks before then. So yeah, that's really, really striking.
The good news is that, you know, she was able to recover from that. She went into remission, as you said, about 3 years later. So that was really, again, quite inspirational for a lot of people. And I think she did a lot later to sort of reduce the stigma of hepatitis C. I think she wrote about it or talked about it, and she was a living example of somebody who beat it. So
Yeah,
that was kind of the healing element that she was able to do.
yeah, you think of
as
that
well.
12th house, and it's kind of the serve or suffer house. And so I can see how she would have taken a lot of solace through the difficulties that she went through in being able to help others. You know, showing them, you know, you can survive this.
And
yeah,
that Chiron transiting Mars right there.
Yeah,
It's
Chiron was
interesting
on
to look
Mars,
at.
and Mars was on
Mars
Uranus,
on Uranus, right.
showing, you know, that she really did not want to do this, but also was quite a shock to her fans.
Right there in the 11th house, right?
Yeah, so that was a very impactful day. And then the next one that I wanted to look at was when she started having, you know, those were physical health symptoms. Then she started dealing with mental health issues. And when did she kind of pinpoint that as beginning?
Yes, again, I think it was after they had several reunion tours, you know, after she recovered, or, you know, they did have some later performances together. So it really wasn't exactly the end of a total retirement, but that would have been, what was the date, Sally, in that around
Yeah, that was
2011, 2012?
Yeah, so their final tour together was in 2011, and October 29th was their final concert. And she said it was after that that she started experiencing really debilitating depression, when she said she couldn't even get out of bed.
For like a year or something.
Was it really that long?
Well, I think it was a long time.
Through 2012.
It was pretty devastating.
And so again, we see her sixth house is being
Pluto right there.
Right there on her Mercury, which you think of the mind. And Pluto, you think of the type of illness it would bring, would be more not so much physical, but more psychological, would you think? Sort of underground.
Yeah, well, the Pluto transiting Mercury, obviously Mercury thinking the mind as well. But yeah, you do think of it as more internal.
Yeah,
for sure.
And then all of the things from the past that have built up. You know, there's a theory that when we have emotional pain, it kind of locates itself in our body and can manifest in many different ways. So it's almost like she's, you know, had this life with a lot of pain, and it's all kind of backing up on her, and it's oversetting her a bit. And you can see Pluto is going to make a long transit. It's still in Capricorn. And what would have happened in 2020?
Conjuncting her sun.
Yeah, with Saturn.
With Saturn, right?
Because we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020 at 22 degrees of Capricorn. So it's not like she, on April 30th, 2022, had a moment and couldn't deal anymore. She's been suffering a long, long time. Because when that Saturn was on her sun with Pluto,
it was opposing. Wow.
It was, another Saturn opposition, just like when she retired. So I would imagine that the last 2 years have been really difficult for her since that happened. And of course, there was no performing or getting out, because no one was doing that. Because didn't she say it's, she kind of performing kind of got her out of herself, and it's when she was home that the trouble started?
Yeah, it's kind of back to that moon in the 10th, I think. Emotionally, it was important for her to have an audience and to have that interaction with people. And she was tied to the land in her home, but it seemed like she did worse when, she wasn't in the public arena, even though it took its toll too on her health, right?
Yeah, because that last concert, she had Jupiter on that moon, like you say, out there shining. She wanted to shine her light in the world.
It's interesting to look at her natal chart too, because she has the North Node in the 11th and the South Node in the 5th. And when you have the South Node in the 5th, a more modern interpretation of the nodes is, in a past life, for instance, she spent a lot of time focused on herself, her own pleasure. And if you have the South Node in the 5th, you may have difficulty in this lifetime. She had difficulties with children, right? And that could be some indicator of that. So, if you have North Node in the 11th, it's more about you want to shine your light on the community or be more supportive of the community or the greater good kind of thing. And so she was a little torn with that, having that moon in the 10th house, her Leo rising where she wanted to shine. But in this lifetime, it wasn't all supposed to be about her. And she did after her musical career, she was an inspirational figure. She did a lot of motivational speaking. She wrote books, and she tried to help people by publicizing her mental health issues, the people that read her books. So she did a lot of good. And obviously she was a nurse and cared about people and helped people in that way as well. So I think she did fulfill that part of her mission, but I don't think it was that easy for her.
No, nothing in this chart tells us that this person is going to have an easy life, right? Great heights and great depths are indicated by this chart. And so here at this point, as she's facing Pluto's journey through her 6th house, she is going to have recovery from depression and go out and help motivate others. But then I think it's probably when Saturn and Pluto met that sun that it became very difficult again, because it's setting off that natal T-square in her chart. And also you see at the end of this concert tour, the South Node is going over that Uranus again, so losing her audience. And just some kind of excitement and electricity. Can you imagine being in front of an audience and the energy you would get from that? And then the feeling that you would get when you, all that's gone, nobody's cheering for you, there's no lights on you. I just can't imagine what that would feel like.
Yeah. And with that Uranus in the 11th, she did definitely have an appeal to audiences and the greater community. And it's interesting also, I was reading that she, obviously associated with her health issues, but she became friends with a lot of academics and got involved with research on the brain. And, I think she she described herself as somebody who was interested in more natural ways of healing. But I think she definitely took advantage of a lot of the medical traditional, medications and therapies. Looking at her, it was very interesting in later years. Such a beautiful woman, but she ended up having a very puffy face and definitely didn't look as healthy. And I just wonder, what the medications that she felt that she had to take might have also contributed to taking a toll on her
That's
body.
true. I imagine she had to take quite a cocktail of medication just to recover from hepatitis.
But I think with the mental health issues, I think she might have had something similar to like a shock therapy even.
Oh, okay.
I think she really took advantage of maybe some very progressive treatments. I'm not directly familiar with it, but I'm just kind of wondering. I mean, just seeing photographs of her later on, because she was 76. I always think that's not that old, and the puffiness of her face is what really concerned me, seeing her.
It could be some medication she was on for antidepressants or something.
Yeah, right.
Made her seem less than healthy. Yeah, we haven't looked too much at the role of Neptune in her transiting Neptune in her chart. We know she's got it down here in her third house. But at this point, Neptune is in the last degrees of Aquarius. So it's not really impacting. It's kind of just past the sextile to the midheaven, which would have been maybe that kind of partnering with her daughter again for another tour. But Neptune is going into Pisces, into her 8th house, and that's where it will remain for the rest of her life. So I don't know, maybe that could be some medications too that are kind of eroding her a bit.
Well, it would take, sometimes you have to take medication in order to get what you need, but a lot of times there are side effects, and it does take its toll, even when it may be healing in a certain way.
Yeah, so we see that she's been on a long Capricorn journey, first with Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune there, and then Pluto. So it's almost like it was written in the stars, wasn't it, that she was going to have to deal with her health in these last years of her life in one way or another. And that Sun Venus in her 6th house is connected to her Mars Saturn in her 12th, kind of shows us that link between physical and mental health. You almost
very
wonder,
strong link.
That they're really connected. So she and Wynonna were scheduled to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is the pinnacle for.
And I wondered about that, because here it is the day before that event, that big honoring both her daughter and herself, and then she chose to take her own life. So you kind of wonder what set her off. She couldn't face going to that event. Obviously, that there had to be some connection there, right?
The timing is interesting. And so this is when she was inducted, May 1st, the day before she did take her own life. At that point, we were having a sun-moon conjunction at 10 degrees of Taurus, and it was an eclipse because the North Node was very nearby. So that could be, if you were looking at someone's chart who is having this aspect, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to take your own life, but it's definitely a very powerful and impactful time when you're having a solar eclipse just 4 degrees away from your own moon and square your ascendant Pluto. So
Mhm.
I don't know. How do we even begin to unpack that? Oh, don't
Yeah,
forget
and I don't know
Uranus.
how much she had been in the news prior to that. Obviously they must have been announced that they were going to be getting that award, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, well, that eclipse obviously seems to be impactful right there.
Mm. Yeah, because that new, if it were an ordinary new moon on her moon, you would think, oh, wow, in her 10th house, that exalted moon. Oh, man, this is going to be a career peak.
Mhm. So
But then,
definitely something surprising and definitely a shock.
but an eclipse, during a solar eclipse, that sun gets covered by the moon.
Mhm.
So I'd almost feel like, you're looking, you're getting this great high honor, but yet are you feeling it in your body? Are you sensing it? Or is it just kind of like a dead thing to you because it's an eclipse? I don't know. That's just kind of one of my speculations on how you would interpret a
Mhm.
solar eclipse on your own moon.
Yeah, that makes sense in this situation.
And squaring Pluto.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I don't know if, even if she was thinking at that time, she may have been just so in such a dark place that she wasn't even really logically registering what was going on. But you definitely see that, here's the day of the award, she's having a sun on her moon with Uranus. And so she's getting this great fame, but, like you say, with shock and
Mhm.
horror at the same time. What's going on in her 8th house?
Hmm. Well, I noticed that it's interesting with the Neptune, Jupiter, Venus there, and the Venus at 29 degrees. I guess Neptune is trining the Saturn Mars, right?
Mm-hmm.
In her 12th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know, Sally, you'll have to tell me.
I was just looking at that, just the whole idea of death is just so lit up
Mhm.
in her chart. We'd had the Jupiter Neptune conjunction at 23, which is at the midpoint of that Mars Saturn conjunction. And then Jupiter and Venus were conjunct, I think, at 27 degrees a few days earlier. And so all that Pisces energy is creating a quincunx to her Jupiter Chiron, Neptune IC here in the 3rd house. So that's what makes me think she wasn't quite conscious of what was going on in her everyday life. She was just so in her pain.
It seems like with that Venus, Jupiter in Pisces, Jupiter being the ruler of Venus, exalted in Pisces, it seems like, kind of a release of her suffering, really. And so when you look at that, especially in that 29th degree, it seems like at one level or her soul level that it could be looked at in a positive way because she was obviously in pain. And this was kind of a releasing moment in her death.
Yeah,
I mean, very sad for her family, obviously her daughters, her husband and her fans. But for her, maybe this was the way that, she was going to get released. I mean, I think in our society, we look at suicide in a very negative light. But I think when people go to the other side, there's not as much judgment as people think we may be judged. I don't know. Things that I've kind of read. So it's hard to make a judgment of somebody else that is in that much pain, I think.
Yeah, you get the feeling when someone's at this point that they're fighting so many battles on so many fronts. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about her initially, that she wants to do so much more than her body is physically capable of doing. There are just so many more demands on her energy than she has energy to meet. And I almost think that having these illnesses throughout her life is kind of her body's way of fighting back and saying, take care of me, prioritize me, because everything else just kind of floods out to everyone else. And so this, I think, wherever she was, it was just, like you say, she was experiencing this as a window to leave this pain.
And it's always tempting for family members. I mean, obviously her daughters have been part of her struggles all through her life. I mean, various struggles, not just mental health struggles, but there's always the temptation to, oh, what if we would have done this? What if we could have done that to prevent something like that? And you just hope that they don't, carry guilt for anything that they might not have done or whatever. They're two strong women along with their mother, and everybody admires them professionally, right? And wishes the best for them. So whatever demons may have been part of their ancestry too, that they'll be able to kind of resolve this. And maybe that was part of the purpose of Naomi's life as well, to kind of work through some ancestral tendencies or difficulties with that Cancer 12th house, Mars, Saturn. Perhaps she helped some evolution there.
Yeah. And with her suffering, maybe this, like her daughter said when they made the announcement initially, she died because of mental illness. And so talking about it and bringing her story out, who knows how many people it's going to help. But something in this chart just tells me she was done. The window was opened. The opportunity was there. And she just could go on no more. And when you think about it, she's been suffering with this mental illness since 2012, 2011, so over 10 years. So she tried. And I hope that will be a comfort to her family too, that she really did try. And she gave as much as she could until she could give no more. And so you can almost see the universe kind of opening up and saying, okay, Naomi, come home. And to symbolize it even so beautifully in her chart, she's got this axis, 28 degrees Gemini, Sagittarius, and Jupiter, and Venus were just sitting right here. It's what's called the south bending of the nodes. You picture at the south node, it's like you empty out a bucket. And when you reach that south bending, it's like it's completely emptied out. And then as things start to move up towards the north node, it fills again. So this was like a total emptying out of Naomi Judd. But there is something in her spirit that's going to go on and begin again. So I thought, I almost cried when I looked at this chart. So we like to close our talk on celebrities by making a prediction. And so one thing I would predict for Naomi Judd is watch when she has her Uranus return. This happens when we are around 84. Uranus comes back to the place where it was when we were born. So in a kind of a normal lifespan, you think of 84 as being a normal lifespan. Uranus hits every planet and angle in your chart and then comes back around to itself. And so you can see here on August 29th, 2028, Uranus is back at its natal position. And so mark your calendars and see if at that point, maybe there's a movie about her life or a book that makes a big splash, or who knows, by then maybe we'll have, what are they called? Holograms of the Judds, and people will be paying money to go to a concert and hear them perform. Is that the right word, hologram?
I'm not sure, but I'm excited about the state that and this aspect that you thought about. And so, it gives you something to look forward to.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, notice that about people who are famous who've died before their Uranus return. And is anything happening in their life? As I was telling Sally before, Princess Margaret, who died when she was, I think, in her early 70s, when she was having her Uranus return, her whole love story with Peter Townsend was played to international audiences on The Crown. And so, all of a sudden there were books about Princess Margaret again, and she was everywhere, a good dozen years after she died. So I wouldn't be surprised if you can go maybe in 2028 and see a hologram of the Judds performing.
So we're gonna write down that date on our calendar, aren't we? So even if you don't live till 84, you can still make an impact.
We die, but our charts live on. And so that's always the good news about that you get from astrology. So anyway, do you feel like learning about Naomi's kind of enriched your life in any way?
I do. I almost learned maybe too much about her in a way. The sadness, is kind of hard to think about, because I always thought about the music and how successful they are. But this gives me hope, what you just talked about, and she did lead a full life, so and made an impact on people. So that's kind of what we want to think about more than the difficulties too.
Yeah, and because that music will live on.
And it does make us think about too, I think, looking at her daughter's charts. I'm really curious. I did glance at Ashley's, which I mentioned to you before we started this video, but she's got a lot of Aries energy.
Yeah,
as I recall.
Well, maybe we should look at her chart next then. When we do our next broadcast. And because Ashley's very interesting too, because she was instrumental in the Me Too movement.
Right.
One of the first women.
Right. And she had some abusive situations that occurred to her, are very interesting, isn't it? That mother and daughter both had some difficulties there. But I'd love to look at her chart. I always thought, of her as a great actress, really enjoyed her performances.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, we just thank everyone for listening, and please make comments below, and we would love to hear what you think of our discussion of Naomi Judd's chart. And if you have anything to add, we would love to hear it. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sally. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Bye.
Bye.